Hello and welcome to The Kit Locker, a podcast of Blacksite Media. My name is Simon Roberts. To accompany our series on YouTube, going through the weapons, equipment and uniforms of the SAS, the Special Air Services SP team, the Special Projects team, we're going to do a short series to show you some reference pictures which enable us to tie pieces of equipment together with certain time periods. These pictures have been available in various forms in books or online over the last 20-25 years, and I've built up a collection of these in order to be able to create some sense of a timeline of the development of equipment. What we've got here today are a series of pictures from the period before the SAS became world famous with the Iranian embassy siege. These are pictures that come from the time pre-1980. The SP team was established after the events of the Munich Olympics in 1972, where a number of Israeli athletes were killed, and it was decided by the British government to establish a fast response counter-terrorist team, the SP team, and the date usually for that is assigned to 1975 or so, although I suspect it was kicking off much earlier. There's very little information about this period. There are a few pictures which we can guess are from that period, 1975 to 1980, where you can see equipment in the process of forming. For someone like myself, who wasn't in the military, wasn't in the SAS, who is a collector, it's of prime importance to be able to establish the historical veracity of the types of equipment that we're presenting. And so we can't understate the importance of reference pictures to that. When you're not in a unit like the SAS, you obviously have very limited access to information. Again, for those operational security reasons, which should be obvious. And so you really have to adopt the approach of a sort of forensic archaeologist uncovering information about a lost civilization almost, where you piece together from fragments and elements of the available visual material a sense of the times that the pictures portray, and therefore the equipment tallied to those times. What we are going to do now is look at this small selection of pictures from the pre-1980 period, and I'll provide a bit of comment on what we can see in those pictures. This first photograph has been published a number of times and is attributed to be of Thomas or Tommy Palmer, who was a lance corporal at the time of the Iranian embassy siege, whose service ended when he died in 1983 as a sergeant. Bearing in mind this is likely to be the early to mid-70s, you can see the nature of the equipment that's been assembled so far is fairly basic. We don't know where or when this picture was taken. You can see he's standing there against the wall of what might be something like a military hut or a shed, and it's probably in a training scenario. He's wearing some equipment which we can readily identify, the S6 respirator, and he's carrying the Heckler & Koch MP5 submachine gun. He's wearing a set of what appear to be the Royal Tank Regiment overalls, the polycotton coveralls that were available at the time, as we know, of the Iranian embassy siege. You can see he's got perhaps what looks like an NBC hood around his collar there that may have been pulled down. We know that the troopers at this time did use the NBC hoods as a form of gas and head protection while wearing the respirator in this role. And if you look just on the right hand side of the picture below his elbow, so just round the back of his left hip, you can just about make out a pouch which is likely to contain a Python PF70 radio, personal radio. You can see there's not an awful lot of detail on belt kit here, no apparent holster or MP5 pouch on the legs. This seems in keeping with stuff that I've been told when I discussed this with the late Mel Parry, warrant officer, one of the key members in the SP team, the Ops Research Wing, the Counter-Revolutionary Warfare Unit, who developed equipment. He told me at this time, before the embassy siege, the equipment could sometimes have been very basic. There wouldn't necessarily have even been holsters available or magazine pouches. And when I asked him about, well, where would you put a pistol, a sidearm in that case? And he just said, well, in your pocket. So if you had overalls with pockets on the thigh, say, you may have just stuffed your Browning high power in there, if that's what was being used at that time. We suspect it was. It was a standard British Army sidearm. The MP5, as I say, you can see the outline of that here, and we know that other weapons were tried as well. The interesting thing for me is the body armour, which you can see Tommy wearing. And from my understanding, talking to Mel and others, this predates the ubiquity of soft textile type armours in body armour carriers. And it looks to be a certain type of armour, which I have seen before, in a polycotton cover. And you can see some nylon straps there, probably Velcro for securing it over the chest. And the armour inside these armour carriers, I think, was a hard plate. That is a ceramic plate armour. So in a way very similar to the low-profile plate carriers you see today, where there is no significant amount of soft Kevlar armour. There is just a ballistic composite which is seated over the central part of the body to protect vital organs. As I say, a very basic set of equipment. It's also possible that, as a picture taken perhaps in training, equipment had been stripped away. You may have seen the soldier wearing a belt with a holster, with a pouch for magazines, and he's removed it for this picture. Difficult to say. The radio pouch has its own independent suspension strap, so that can be worn without a belt. Very little other detail that you can see. He's wearing leather gloves, I believe, as well, and he's got pretty much the standard type of S6 canister there. This next picture, which appears to be, again, a training scenario. On the left there you can see what looks like the front of a Range Rover, and to the right you can see the back of a van. Seems to show troopers in the process of abstracting suspects or possible hostiles, terrorists, or maybe hostages from the back of that vehicle to the right. And they're wearing very similar equipment as we saw in the Tommy Palmer pic. The tank regiment overalls, by the looks of them. We can see the S6 respirators and hoods. These may or may not be NBC type hoods. They look a little bit shapeless for that. And again, the grain and focus of the picture isn't, as many reference pictures, particularly brilliant. But we can determine a little bit. The figure on the left of the picture there appears to be wielding a revolver, and you can see on the right the picture there shows another trooper with what's clearly a visible Python PF70 radio on his left kidney position. And if you just look a little harder, you can see there is a suspension strap for that particular case for the Python radio there. Not much else you can really tell from this, and we will now move on to the next picture. A similar time period here. As we saw with the previous pictures, we have the S6 respirator, we have what appear to be more clearly defined NBC hoods here, and what appear to be tank regiment coveralls. We've got a number of interesting items in this picture. We can see a trooper in the foreground holding up what appears to be an L-13 type flashbang grenade, rubber case with a tin top, a fuse and spoon or lever. You can see behind him there is another trooper with what looks to be a thick Len Dixon style bridle leather gun belt, and there is a holster on the belt. It presumably carries something like a Browning high power pistol. And also in the hands of the trooper in the centre of the picture at the rear, there's a weapon that's unidentifiable from my standpoint here. I'm not quite sure what that is. It doesn't quite read to me as anything that I can identify very easily from here. But he's wearing, again, that body armour vest, a very simple frontage on the vest, suspended by nylon, sort of the material that they use in car seat belt straps, velcro to secure it to his front. The man just to the right of him, as we look at the picture, appears to be in a crouching position, I assume holding a pistol, although I can't quite make it out. This looks to be some sort of training scenario where there appears to be a basic wooden construction that's been made to use to simulate an entry point around which these troopers are assembling. Again, fairly basic equipment and stripped back. The possibility is that this is a period where, for training, troopers were prepared to strip back equipment to try different scenarios, although I'm aware from talking to Mel Parry that when he ran these kinds of exercises, he would usually insist on troopers wearing a full assembly of equipment. He believed very much that you should train in what you fight in, with all of the encumbrance and the difficulties of getting acclimatized to the equipment, which is bulky. There are things protruding. There are things that you have to reorientate yourself towards using because you're wearing a respirator. So becoming familiar with your holster position so you can reach to your sidearm instinctively, being able to reach for other elements of equipment that you may be carrying on a belt or slung by your side, for instance. So a little more detail on this picture, and now we can see the definition of the weapon in the hand of the man in the middle, and that looks like what we'd probably call a Mac 10 or an Ingram Mac 10 with a suppressor on the front of it. That looks a lot clearer now. And so we move on to another picture. So this picture here, I think, probably predates the ones we've seen before, in fact. It appears in the words of Mel Parry, when I used to speak to him, to show what they might have called experimental kit. You can see in the trooper's hands here, he holds, again, a Mac 10, compact submachine gun, sometimes I believe known in the military as a spray and pray weapon, often cited as being the kind of weapon that might be used in Northern Ireland in a covert setting where it would be placed in the footwell of a vehicle for a mobile unit and used as a cover weapon when perhaps a unit needed to make a fast escape from a situation or lay down covering fire. You can see here again a basic, what looks to be a polycotton style of coverall. These ones may not be tank regiment coveralls to my eye. The placement of the pockets on them appears to be a little bit different. There is a thigh pocket on the left thigh, but the breast pocket I'm not too sure about there. The most striking thing is that he's wearing a very different kind of respirator, almost something as you would see being used by the fire brigade with an actual air tube, air pipe connected to the front, going either to some form of filter worn at the back or maybe a positive pressure air supply unit of some kind. Difficult to say. You can see a sling for the Mach 10, which is similarly orientated to the way that perhaps you'll get a lot of quick release slings nowadays, where the weapon can be slung comfortably just over the abdomen at a single point of retention. Next we have another picture of kit very similar to the early style we saw with Tommy Palmer. Polycotton coveralls, a belt, no holster or pouches, but there just on the right at the waist level you can see the Python pouch for this particular trooper, who appears to be in a kind of urban sniper role. I haven't identified that weapon. I'm sure I could probably look it up. It's a reasonably obscure picture, but it does tally with some of the elements we've seen before. This trooper doesn't appear to be wearing any body armour. He has what looks like an NBC hood on, and perhaps a form of face mask or balaclava there for concealment as well. And he's got what appear to be the aircrew gloves, the very thin leather gloves that we see worn at the Iranian embassy and later. This is a picture that was given to me by the late Mel Parry, and it is very unclear to me, and perhaps unlikely that it represents actual operational equipment, although some items appear to be of the time. There's the S6 respirator. The trooper on the left appears to be holding a pistol, which looks to me like a Browning high power from where I'm standing, and a holster on his right hip, which looks again very similar to early leather belt holsters supplied by Len Dixon. However, the body armour is very different from what we'd expect. Looks as if it's got some kind of extended shoulder cover from here, although I can't really quite tell. The overalls themselves look very different from the tank regiment coveralls. They may be an early form of fire resistant coverall. Man on the right appears to just have a balaclava on with an integral hood on that particular coverall, but I can't quite tell what else he's got. The pouches on the right side of him there appear to be indistinct, but he does appear to have what looks like a leather holster on his right hip as well, what's called a wet moulded holster, which is the typical style that was produced by Len Dixon and later on Paul Evers. However, as I say, I'm very dubious about this picture, and I think it's highly likely it was troopers wearing kit that was experimental, that was being tried out by the Ops Research Wing for functionality and durability and operational conformity, and as a part of the process of deriving what the best setups would be for this kind of role. That concludes our look at a series of pictures from the pre-1980 period. We'll be moving on to look at some other periods of reference material, and I'll give a little bit more commentary on what we can see in those pictures. But meantime, thanks very much for tuning in to The Kit Locker, a podcast of Black Site Media. Please do go to our YouTube channel, like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.